You can do all of the strategies, but if you don't have the relationship and the co-regulation, it's going to make it harder.
Ever feel like you suck at this job? Motherhood, I mean. Have too much anxiety and not enough patience? Too much yelling, not enough play? There's no manual, no village, no guarantees. The stakes are high. We want so badly to get it right. But this is survival mode. We're just trying to make it to bedtime. So if you're full of mom guilt, your temper scares you, you feel like you're screwing everything up, and you're afraid to admit any of those things out loud, this podcast is for you. This is Failing Motherhood. I'm Danielle Bettman, and each week we'll chat with a mom ready to be real, sharing her insecurities, her fears, her failures, and her wins. We do not have it all figured out. That's not the goal. The goal is to remind you, you are the mom your kids need. They need what you have, you are good enough, and you're not alone. I hope you pop in earbuds, somehow sneak away, and get ready to hear some hope from the trenches. You belong here, friend. We're so glad you're here. Welcome to Failing Motherhood. My name is Danielle Bettman, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Laura Pryor. That name might sound familiar if you've been a long-term listener to Failing Motherhood, because she was the first episode, the first interview a year ago. So if you want to get caught up on Laura's journey, it is a well-loved episode, episode 1, 45 minutes of therapy with Laura. And she is back. She's the first guest to be back for a second episode, and we cover so many good things. She came on primarily to talk about brain science and regulation and co-regulation and really being able to understand and then calm our response when we get agitated and triggered, and be able to pass on that ability to our kids as well, for them to be able to regulate themselves through tantrums and meltdowns and just big emotions and all of the things. So we end up talking about shame in parenting and what that looks like and how to become aware of that. And we talk a lot about how to reflect on your own childhood and your parents' parenting to be able to become more aware of the default that you find yourself in when you are stressed and pushed to your limit. And we really get practical about what that regulation looks like when it comes to timeout, whether or not you should leave your child in timeout, whether you need to take a timeout yourself. And we get to that right at the end. So be sure to get to that place, because I know that it's going to be really practical for your next steps of what to do from here. I know that when you listen to this episode, you may find yourself saying, I'm not good at that, or I struggle with that. But Laura and I are really, really working on just helping you feel more educated in being able to know, what do I do with this information? If I know that this is a struggle for me, maybe 2 years ago, I didn't, and now I do. That's progress. Progress is becoming aware of the things that are tripping us up so that we can begin to address them and heal them. That's a win. So if you're listening to this episode and you're new to these concepts, this is good. This is a good thing. And you don't need to do it perfectly. And you don't need, you never are going to get to the place where you don't struggle with it. So take this as really empowering information that will allow you to find the tools that you need and the support you need to become an even better parent tomorrow. And we're not comparing ourselves to each other. Instead, you can compare yourself to the way that you showed up yesterday to today. That's the only comparison that matters. So in this episode, we're going to talk about shame, regulation, our patience, brain science. Laura uses lots of big words to talk about the fight or flight response and what things we don't have control over and what we do. And I just think it's really, really important information to understand as a parent so that we can better understand how to help our kids have these skills at more of an age than we are learning them now. So I can't wait for you to dive into this episode. If you haven't yet, and you've been listening to Failing Motherhood, now that it's the year anniversary, go leave a review. Go leave a review wherever you listen to it, on Apple Podcasts or wherever. Be sure you're following, whether that's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share with a friend. Post an episode in your Instagram stories or in a Facebook group, and just let them know that you're getting really valuable info from this podcast. And because I know that that is the only way that it's grown over the last year. And I'm just so thankful for your support. I'm so grateful that there are so many moms willing and vulnerable enough to spend the time with me over these conversations and be able to have the hard conversations and know that they're not alone, and to stop beating themselves up for the places that they struggle, and instead be okay with asking for help and talking about it and normalizing it. So if you are on this journey with me, I'm so, so, so glad that you're here. And if you are ready to take the next step for your family, to seek out what it would look like to get more support and to commit to an investment in changing the culture of your home after this episode, then go to parentingwholeheartedly.com/coaching, which is all of the details about what it looks like to work with me over a 4-month period. And even if you don't feel like you're ready for that level of commitment yet, then just schedule a free call. And at that free call, I will just listen to a little bit more about what's going on with your family, what your goals are, and be able to then recommend right off the bat where I feel like you should go from here. And I can connect you with either other resources that I recommend, or even like a custom coaching package that would be a good fit for your family. So never feel like the answer isn't out there. It is. That is the best part about living in right now, is the resources are there and the hope is there, and tomorrow can be different if you're ready to say yes. So seek that out. The links are in the show notes to schedule a free call, and that is your first next step to better days. If you find yourself really, really, really saying that now is the time to work on your patients, now is the time to become more apt to have parenting strategies that work with your tough kid, and that you know that time is fleeting and the relationships in your family matter, and your family is your greatest investment and legacy, and you don't want the time to run out before you have that relationship with them where they come home for Christmas and love being around. So go seek out those resources and dive into this episode. I can't wait for you to share with me what you feel like you learned and what you needed to hear, and what was new information and what was something that you've heard before but maybe needed to be reminded of. So let's dive in. Welcome, Laura. Thanks so much for coming back. I'm so excited to have you on again.
Yes, I'm very excited to be here again.
So if you haven't listened to the first episode that Laura was on, it was episode 1, 45 minutes of therapy. It is, to date, the most listened to episode of Failing Motherhood. And to be fair, I don't think it's just because it's the first episode. I think people just really like free therapy.
Yes.
And also you just like dropped all of the knowledge. So there's that. So go recap that episode if you haven't heard Laura's story, because this episode will be a little bit of a different framework since we already know her. She's the first guest to be welcomed back to the podcast, and it is timely because it is like the first anniversary of Failing Motherhood. So
yes.
Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, happy birthday to Failing Motherhood.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the most insane passing of time.
Yes.
Like, has it been a year? It feels like 100 years, but also like a vortex of a blur.
Yes, like nothing like a pandemic to make something seem simultaneously slow and yet, wait, what day and month is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Every day it's like a day farther than I thought it was. Like, I thought it was Wednesday and it's already Friday. And wait, what?
Yes.
Well, we survived the school year. What has your pandemic looked like? Like, catch us up from the last time we talked to you.
So it's definitely been quite a shift. My daughter Mina, she wrapped up in-person kindergarten. We tried to do Zoom, and about 3 weeks in, we were like, this is not working on all fronts, and ended up enrolling her in a different school district so that she could do in person. And she's done really well. She went in hating everything and is walking out that writing is her favorite. So I think her
Ooh.
teacher did a fantastic job of kind of helping to win her over in a
That's
very
huge.
supportive way. Yes, yes. And then
Good.
Mr. Jack is now in school full time for his master's. So I am sole breadwinner of the family. And he's rocking the stay at home dad life as well. So yeah,
Nice.
it'll be interesting over the summer because this is the first summer where we won't have full-time childcare because she's not in preschool. So
Right. That's an adjustment.
very much so. And yeah, and I've, as a therapist in private practice, not that it has to be just private practice, but we've all been very busy, very full. Because, like I've been telling clients, the pandemic just took whatever was already an existing issue and pressure cooked it. So everything's coming out from the woodwork.
So you've been busy.
Very busy. Yes.
What a year to be a therapist.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So have you been meeting with your therapist?
I actually signed myself up. I worked with a coach for a little while, and she is a social worker and certified life coach, and she's in California. And so I worked with her for a little bit, kind of starting in October, November, and then we wrapped up, I want to say maybe like a month ago. So I'm just kind of taking a pause from that and sitting with whatever is going to come up next. And I'm sure I'm not done talking with her. So, but yes.
Yeah, it's important to have like the structure around you to support you when you're supporting so many other people. And not only for as a therapist, but as a mom. And,
Yes.
that's not the topic for today, but, throwing that out there, if you are not taking care of yourself after this pandemic, get on that.
My favorite Leslie Note quote is, "No one achieves anything alone."
Ooh, yes. So true. So I invited you back to be able to dive into some brain science and kind of pick your brain when it comes to the parent-child relationship and being able to support your kids and what that looks like with like the back-end science, because I really feel like you need to understand the why to be able to do the how. And I think sometimes when we're picking up things here and there from a podcast or from a Instagram post, it's the how or like the strategy, but you're not able to run with it in the moment consciously because there's so much else going on that is basically overriding your ability to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was going to dive into that and be able to really feel like we're making some progress on the back end of things, of just knowing what wasn't even really known 20 years ago when it comes to what is crucial with parenting. So what do you feel like moms need to understand first? Like, what is co-regulation?
Yeah, so I'll kind of start with this. So it wasn't my first, I apologize. My second job out of getting my master's, I was hired on as the family therapist for a local residential treatment center for women and their kids. I was not a mom. And so I came at it from a standpoint of very clinical. I bought all the books and read all the things on all the skills and how to work with strong-willed children. And like the principles were they were simple. They're not easy to apply. And now that I'm a mom, I'm like tossing all that baby out with the bathwater, because really what it comes down to is this idea of co-regulation, and that it's in the relationship itself that you can do all of the strategies. But if you don't have the relationship and the co-regulation, it's going to make it harder.
Mm-hmm.
And so co-regulation, kind of that dual attunement, that your child or children has an overall felt sense that you are their safe harbor, no matter what, even if they don't like you in that moment. You know what I mean? That even if you are parenting and setting boundaries, that they know you are, and somewhere in the back of their mind, they know you are doing that out of love and care and for their safety.
So where do you feel like moms like go wrong, or what are you hearing in sessions where you're like, okay, I can see that we have a misguided understanding or like a miscommunication? Like, what does that look like so that moms can kind of relate to like, oh yeah, that's probably me.
Sure. And if I use any examples, I don't want, of course, any listeners to feel like I'm personally attacking them. I am not placing judgment by any means, because we are all just trying to get through life, basically.
Yes.
And, especially when we're raising tiny humans, we just want to raise them to be good adult humans. And so a lot of times, I'll use more examples from probably my personal life with my daughter, Mina, because that's just much easier for me to grab onto. But for example, Mina is very strong-willed and high needs and has all the labels. And yes, you have one of these minis at home yourself. You know what I'm talking about. And I know you spoke about it in previous podcasts. And so I know she and I, in our relationship, we are out of alignment when I am redirecting her and she is just constantly no, whatever no looks like. It doesn't have to be like a verbal no.
Right.
And so that's not to say she doesn't have bad days. We all have bad days, but you get a sense, you feel this, you know your child. And so in those moments, then I kind of go back to, okay, like quickly in my mind, I'm thinking about like, where have I been the past few hours? Because I am like the Energizer Bunny when I'm home, and I'm usually cleaning or I'm reorganizing something, because believe it or not, I'm one of those people who finds that very therapeutic and relaxing, to my husband's dismay, I will add. And so like, it's usually she has been putting out consistent bids for connection with me, which just looks like, hey mom, would you go and, get me some clean socks? Because she's got one wet one. And, I'm like, no, you can take care of that yourself because I'm in the middle of doing something. Or, hey mom, I want to show you this, or look at this thing on YouTube. And I've just been like, no. And
watch
those
watch this.
Yeah. And I mean, like, our partners, our children, they give us lots of bids. It is not our job to meet all of them by any means. That is not a realistic expectation. It's consistency over time. So trying to find those ways that I can lean into the bids she is giving me, so that there is still that sense of connection, that like, mom sees me, she hears me, she understands me. Because when that starts to break, that's when you start to see more of that like consistent pushback. And of course, I am speaking about, I would like to at least qualify a neurotypical population, that there's huge exceptions to this. So I know, again, what I'm saying is maybe very quote unquote simple. It's not easy. It is very layered.
Yes, and that's why we have to dive into it, like, because it's a whole thing. It's not, if it were black and white and just a formula to follow, then we'd all be following it and it wouldn't be an issue.
No. And I mean, like, like, I'll totally tell on myself. I have one child, and we stopped with one child for a very good reason. So at least for us, it was a personal choice. Not everyone has that experience. But I definitely feel like I kind of got thrown to the wolves with Mina, and I have zero regrets, and she has been my greatest blessing and lesson.
I have learned so much from my second daughter, and I thank her all the time. And I tell her about my work and some of the families that have kiddos just like her, and I really thank her for her role in my life and what she has taught me. And there's so much value from that. But yeah, doesn't mean it's easy.
No.
Does not mean it comes naturally.
No.
At all.
No. And so I think, like, like you were saying, wanting to understand some of the science, or even like what are some of the like the skills or tools that like maybe you can walk away from after listening to this. They're simple, they're not easy. And so, so kind of really going into, I'm not going to be super wordy, but like really understanding. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, first of all, like we all have a window or a threshold of tolerance for dysregulation, which dysregulation just means activation in the brain and the body. The brain and the body are not separate. They are interconnected. And there's various reasons for that, but it is. And that's some of the new things that we know, that there is no separation divide. Pain is registered as pain in the brain and the body, whether it is emotional or it's physical. And we are hardwired to avoid pain for preservation of life. And we have all sorts of processes in the brain that are completely out of our control. That is all part of the fight, flight, freeze activation, which is also mainly controlled by the vagus nerve. I don't know if I'll actually get into that piece of it today, but I at least want to go over some of like the basics. And so getting back to this threshold of tolerance, this is not something that is static or concrete. It is something that can be expanded. So that like thinking about it as, because of course they're not going to be able to see, but you'll be able to see. But, I think it's Dr. Dan Siegel. He talks about it's the green zone. And the green zone is not the zone of like you're zenned out on top of a mountain and there's absolutely nothing affecting you. The green zone still has emotional dysregulation in it. And so it can still look like, maybe the beginning stages of a temper tantrum, or it can look like, you're grieving something. But what we as the adults want to do, because of course we have to role model it in order to teach it to our children, we can't give them that which we don't possess ourselves, is ways to increase the amount of time we spend in that green zone, which is then increasing our emotional bandwidth. Because if you have more room in that zone, it's going to take longer for you to ratchet up and then flip your lid, which is going into the red zone of sympathetic activation, fight or flight. And then just from a brain science standpoint, we can only stay in that place for so long before our brain is like, you're done, and flips us into the blue zone, which is more about freeze, dissociation. Those are the two big ones. And
just
so
shut it down.
Yeah, just shut down. And it's not a choice we make. Animals, all mammals have this in some way, shape, or form. It's very common. You see it like when a possum plays dead, or when a mouse gets captured by a predator and they play dead. They're not choosing to do that. They go limp. And then when their bodies, probably controlled by what's called the reticular activating system, which is basically our brain smoke alarm, says that it's again safe. Like, let's say the predator sets the animal down and then goes to do something else, and then it scurries away. And so, like I said, we don't have control over how much time, how long we spend in each and where it kind of goes. But if we can expand the amount of time in that green zone, expand our emotional bandwidth, we are setting ourselves up for more success. And of course, our children, because you're keeping yourself regulated. So, for example, we had like kind of an issue come up in the house, and I had to have a very like difficult conversation with Mina, really trying to convince her to allow me to do something with her that was going to be uncomfortable, but it was for her safety, her care. And so I was in the room with her and spent a great deal of emotional bandwidth, you know what I mean? Keeping myself regulated and also keeping her regulated, because I knew the moment I flipped into anger, fear, it was only going to make things worse for her.
Yep.
And so I did. And I've noticed for me, one of the ways I do this for me, of course, is making sure I'm breathing. I talk slower. And I lower my vocal tone. And that is it's habitual now, but it was also very intentional, because that was my way of trying to keep myself down regulated so that I could stay present and attuned to her.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sure you see it time and time again. I see it with Mina. The moment I raise my voice, which she's not used to with me, you know what I mean? That like, and that doesn't, that's not a judgment on anybody because I have, but like she just like completely melts down when I do.
Yep.
Whereas you raise your voice enough, kids become deaf to it. And so like it no longer becomes a quote unquote effective way to help manage their behaviors. Mm-hmm. And that's where it goes back to the relationship that, you know, your listeners, they've got the how. I think the why is helpful for buy-in. Mm-hmm. Kids are just the same. You're not always going to be able to give them the why, but they need that buy-in, and that buy-in comes with the relationship.
Yes. Yes. And that's the true heart of the parenting.
Yeah. Yeah. Not because I said so. Oh, please. I would be a millionaire if all of the times I've thought, oh, just do it because this would make my life easy is playing in my mind. And then I'm deep breath. Okay, let's try this from another angle.
Yes. If only.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like, I mean, I would love for my daughter to just be obedient, meaning she does, I say jump, she says how high.
Yeah.
And
should be easier.
Yeah. And I think I said this in the first podcast that like, she's going to be an awesome adult. She is just a stinker right now sometimes. And it's not, she's just being her. It's not even on purpose to me. She's just being her.
No, it has nothing to do with you.
No.
Yeah.
And I think you bring up a really good point that when we can also gently detach from maybe these judgments of they're doing this to me on purpose because they hate me. It doesn't even have to be a because the foundation is they're doing this to me on purpose. No, they're doing this because they are X age and it is within the range, probably a completely normal behavior.
Mm-hmm. And that comes back to the story that you're telling yourself to explain that behavior.
Yes.
And then how your body acts in response to what it perceives as a threat. And if you heighten that threat up to be something that genuinely requires an emergency response because it's a crisis, then you're going to lose that ability to have consciousness over your body's response to that threat.
Yes. And I don't know necessarily the science behind this piece with like a not yet developed brain, you know, because, you know, Dr. Dan Siegel talks about like the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. Downstairs brain is responsible for like, you know, like basically, you know, all of our unconscious body functions. So breathing, digestion. Yeah. And then all the upstairs brain, of course, is still there, but it's under construction until around age 26, 27, when the prefrontal cortex is fully developed. And the prefrontal cortex, of course, is responsible for helping manage impulsivity and decision making and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so that, like, us being able to use that reticular activating system, also known, I call it the smoke alarm in the brain, that like, we know this. We all have smoke alarms usually. Smoke alarms sometimes just randomly go off, whether it's because there's a justifiable fire or because the darn thing is got low batteries. But anytime we hear it, we're like, wait, what is this? Mm-hmm. And we go and investigate. And so I'm not sure how that smoke alarm in the child's brain plays out, but they are looking to us to tell them if it's an emergency. So they have the RAS as well, but then they are looking to us to validate or calm the situation. And when we ratchet up, they're like, oh, let me just up the ante. Not because they're doing it on purpose, but because they are feeding off of what they feel, perceive from us.
Right. Because their radar is out scanning the world for the first 7 years, trying to figure out how everything works, if they're safe, if they're okay, how they get their needs met. And they're looking to us to really teach them and download all of those things really subconsciously through our example.
Yes.
And if we are showing them like, yes, this is so alarming that I need to respond to this crisis, then that freaks them out.
Well, and like the rule of thumb I tell clients is that like, if you have time to ask yourself if it is a legit threat to your life or the life of someone you love, it's probably not. Because if your child is like teetering close to like the street, you're not going to ask yourself. You're just going to act because that is what your body and brain are designed to do.
Yep.
So it's like, if you can ask yourself, it's probably not.
It's a good rule of thumb.
It might be annoying
Right.
and exhausting, but it's probably not the tiger in the bushes or the fire that your brain is telling you that it is.
Right. And so for kids with like that green level, red level, blue level, do they come in with like a really low bandwidth and then, it increases over time, or what does that look like developmentally?
I don't know scientifically, but my felt sense is that they probably come in, if it would be like, you know what I mean, at like equally activated levels. Do you know what I mean? Because especially, and I'm sure it changes as like the child just gets older. Like babies have like, like very defined. Do you know what I mean? That like in the sense that they cry, my parent responds, and then the parent tries to figure out what the cry was about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely think there is still that dual attunement and co-regulation that goes on between parent and newborn infant, in that first year of life for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That you are consistently showing up when they put out that bid, so a cry, and you are trying to figure out what that cry, that sound is, and figure out what they are needing. So the child learns, I cry and my parent responds. Because I mean, like for babies, it's basically just like discomfort, whether it's I'm tired, I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm gassy, I'm hungry. It's all just discomfort.
Mm-hmm. And then for toddlers, it gets ratcheted up to
it
more
starts
grievances.
to change. Yeah. And I mean, like, and this is why I think it's so challenging for parents because, none of us comes out of like childhood unscathed. You know what I mean? Like our parents all did the best they could with what they knew. And then as we become adults and parents, we make the decision of, I am going to continue this. I am not going to continue this. But here's the kicker. When we as parents get stressed, we default to what we know because that path in the brain is so well worn. So even if you don't want to be a yeller or a spanker or insert whatever it is, when you as the parent get so stressed out, that's your knee-jerk default.
Yep. I know for me, when I'm under stress, I'm much more hypercritical and I default to more shameful wording like, why did you do that? How did you think that would be a good idea? Something like that, because that was closer to what I grew up with.
Absolutely.
And that's what my default becomes when I lose the ability to regulate myself.
Yes. And so it's not about being perfect, of course, because none of us are. It is about unpacking what our experiences were and currently are, how that has shaped us and is continuing to shape us, and then figuring out, okay, this is what I want to do with my child or how I want to show up as a parent or the opposite. Mm-hmm. Because I definitely make lots of mistakes, but I think like the important part is that like, not that we dwell on the mistakes, but that we talk about it.
Yes. Because if beating yourself up worked, it would have worked.
I wouldn't have a job. Like we're all skilled at like just like beating ourselves over the head. Like, yeah, we got this.
So it takes a different approach. It takes much more of an awareness and a level of observing our own behavior to learn from it.
Yeah. And even like thinking about that as we increase our, emotional bandwidth, our time in the green zone, our kids can also see that role modeled. So another way that I do that in my own life, like I said, slow breaths. I slowed down my rate of speech because I'm just naturally a very fast talker. And I also lower my vocal tone. But even something as, again, simple as maintaining a position of curiosity and staying out of certainty. And again, that kind of goes back to these judgments of my child is doing this to me on purpose. But asking yourself, what is going on that my child is doing this? Because staying in uncertainty is a skill that comes with that emotional bandwidth piece, because when you're in fight or flight, you're not asking yourself why.
Mm-hmm.
And so being curious about, you know what I mean, what's going on that my child is doing this behavior, that like, how may I have possibly contributed to, maybe not, it could be in that moment, but even like leading up to it, to be able to go back and learn from that.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so often we can jump to conclusions that make sense with our life experience, conclusions that, you know, would be how we would react to that circumstance. And it's hard to stop ourselves from just reacting with the evidence that we have and saying, what else do I need to know? What am I not seeing or understanding about this? And being able to get into their shoes, because we don't even do this well in our marriages.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all close, intimate relationships that are a struggle to be able to really relate well.
And I know I mentioned this in the first podcast, but like, you know, that it's that those close, intimate relationships that we have with our partners and with our children. And that the reason why they can be so activating is because we see them every day, or they're the people we see the most on any given day. And so they are constantly mirroring to us stuff about ourselves that maybe we really don't like seeing.
Mm-hmm. And that's hard.
But if we don't become aware of that, we will continue to unconsciously, no, this is your fault. And, you know, and however way that shows up, because that can show up in many different ways.
Mm-hmm. And then end up, pushing them away or just disconnecting. And then we lose our influence on them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that keeping the relationship above all else, of course, and in the case of our children, keeping them like safe, you know what I mean, is absolutely important. Because we're raising these tiny humans. And at least in our current culture, a measure of success in that is that they leave us.
Mm-hmm.
Like they leave the home. That the hope is that they will want to return again and stay in our lives.
That's the goal. Yes. Yes. But it's again, not as easy as we think.
Yes.
So circling back to the younger years, when we're working on expanding our bandwidth, and we're hoping that they do as well, what helps for them to be able to expand their bandwidth? Because I think either we tend to assume that it just will happen, you know, they can write it off by age. Once they're 4 or 5, they'll have this all ironed out. Like, this is just a phase. But if we don't actually, you know, interact with them in a way that does help, that capacity may not always be there. So what is kind of crucial ways of interacting with them in those young years?
I think because so much of parenting is really like an internalized process, even though it feels like we do a lot of external stuff, which don't get me wrong, we do. But like even being able to put words to what you are experiencing in any given moment, whether that is, oh my gosh, I had so much fun with you today. To like, oh my gosh, that was really tough. And we did it. To putting words to what you see them experiencing. You can tell this is making you, are you feeling really upset right now? Scared? You know, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But the biggest piece is that like oftentimes as parents, we don't put to words to what we are actually feeling. Like, you know, I'll tell Mina, I'm really overwhelmed right now. I just need a talking break.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we've done that enough that she understands it. Now that probably wouldn't be exactly that easy in if she was that upset, you know what I mean? But there's been times when like she's marched off to her room, slammed the door, and I just sat there for a minute and breathed because I knew I'm going to go in and face this. I need to be in a good place.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think we can tend to jump to what's wrong with them, what do they need, before checking in with ourselves.
Yeah.
And being able to put even like a 5-second pause in between having that reaction to make it a response of being able to look inward and say, what do I need to have my game face?
Yeah.
To be able to then respond.
Yeah. And again, like not taking it personal, like, how dare you walk away from me when I'm talking to you? Or, you know what I mean? Something like that. That like, okay, that was the only way she knew how to disconnect and get her need met. Like, let her have her moment. I'll take care of me, and then I'll go help take care of her.
Mm-hmm. Because you're adding meaning. You're responding to the meaning that you add to that behavior. And if you that meaning when you grew up meant that's incredibly disrespectful, that you're not getting listened to as a parent, and if you weren't listened to as a child, then that's going to be extra triggering. And there's just a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's like that big piece of, I'm going to call it power and control, but you know, whoever's listening, feel free to use whatever language you can hear. But that idea of, you know, children need to be obedient, or they need to respect me. And my first question is, why? Why do they need to respect you? Like, respect to me is not a given. It's generally earned in a series of interactions over time. Mm-hmm. So if Mina or even my husband does something that I perceive to be disrespectful, I know that's not necessarily my issue because something is wrong with me. It's coming from their place of hurt.
Mm-hmm. Those are hard things to deconstruct.
Yeah. And when you can have or access that gentle detachment and ask yourself, is this really about me? And not in an, it's never my fault, I don't do anything wrong, like egoic, you know what I mean, sort of way. That like asking yourself, okay, how did I maybe contribute to this? And how much of this is actually mine and how much of this is the other person's? Like in the case of children and being a parent, you have to do a lot more like first aid with that because they're still learning. Mm-hmm. With your partners, that's a little bit different situation. But not getting into that knee jerk, they're doing this to me basically because something is inherently bad about me as a person, as a parent, as a partner.
Right. Right. And
because many of us did grow up in those homes where power and control was a place and in place. And we learned as a result of those cumulative experiences, it was our fault. Mm-hmm. Whether we were told or that was just our lived experience.
Right. And if you can't separate the behavior from the identity, then it just usurps all of it. Like, yes. It's not just I made a bad choice, it's I am bad.
Yes, exactly. And nothing in the long term ever really makes it when it's done from a place of shame, which is that I made a bad choice to I am a bad person.
Mm-hmm. Ugh, yeah. That's a whole nother road we could go down.
Right.
Just breaking down. Taking shame out of parenting. Yeah. Oh, it's so important though. But yeah, and a whole nother level of awareness to being able to reflect on your own childhood and see it of where it's present in your current reality. Because it kind of goes undetected.
Yes. And I mean, like the greatest gift we can ever give our children is to do that work in some way, shape, or form, no matter what that looks like. And I realize, I mean, I'll just kind of add that, like, I understand that in the current society we live in, doing that work has some privilege to it. That access to the tools, you know, therapy services to be able to do that, like, you know, if all of your basic needs are being taken care of, like food, shelter, water, heat, all of that, like, if those are not being taken care of, you don't have time to think about this.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's not going to be that, you know what I mean? That like, oh, I'm going to call and make an appointment with a therapist. No, I can't even afford therapy, let alone groceries right now.
Right. To be fair, I have found some great people on TikTok.
Yes, I will not get on TikTok because I know I'll get sucked in. But
You will.
love it when clients send me TikTok videos and they're like, yes, this is what I can't find the words for because it's so helpful to me.
Yes. Yes. It has been incredibly validating to just find more people that have had your experience and they're just a little bit farther in their journey to be able to turn around and say, this is what I've learned. And you're like, I wouldn't have ever thought of it in that light, or just hearing that example or being able to relate to your story. Like, that's why I'm doing the podcast. It's because I feel like we do need just those sounding boards to be able to become more aware of our own existence and experience. And it's so helpful. Even if they're 1 minute videos.
Yeah. And I mean, even though I know maybe we're talking more about like, you know, failing motherhood and moms, but this of course applies to dads too. Yeah. But like, you know, that we as women to be there to be able to support one another and hold space and not have to shame, not to feel, you know, whether that person experiences shame as a result of what they're talking about. That's, you know what I mean, their own spontaneous experience, but definitely not dumping gasoline on the fire by like, what were you thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that never feels good.
No.
What are the since we're now on this topic, what other phrases are good examples of things that we might be saying that are, you know, coming across to add shame to our kids?
I would say like the idea of like, I only did this because you did this. You make me so crazy, or insert you make me so, it could be angry, whatever it is. If you don't do this, I'm going to do this. So any sort of like comparison label. So like selfish, lazy, yelling in front of people, which is, you know, like public shaming.
Ooh, yeah.
It could be not necessarily like a phrase, but more like the body language, like even watching how we are possibly inadvertently showing up with our children, men in particular, that like, sorry guys, you were kind of born behind the 8 ball on this one, because different vocal tones and that like how deep they can be and how loud they can be, that like our brains, when we get flipped into fight or flight, a few of the things that happen is that like we start to only be able to hear lower tones because those are the tones that predators make. And so our hearing changes, our ability to access like speech communication diminishes, our pupils dilate, our digestion slows down, blood pumps to our hands and feet to prepare for fight or flight. Mm-hmm. And so I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but like this idea that like men in particular have to really quiet their voices because they don't have to exert much effort to get loud.
Yeah.
And so like things like slamming a fist, of course, yelling, stomping around, slamming doors, slamming cupboard doors, that like I consider myself to be like a lower sensory threshold person. Like I have a very strong startle reflex that never really disappeared. And so like loud noises will startle me, which gets me activated, even if I'm just like sitting in front of my desk like I am now. Like I'm right by a main road. I don't know how many times I hear cars slam on their brakes and I can just like feel myself brace.
And I feel like that is generally a sensitivity that's true of strong-willed kids as well.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Canary, I jokingly say it, but there's a lot of truth to it, that like I work with a lot of canaries in the mine shaft, that they are the ones to be able to feel, perceive all of these like subtleties that are carrying out in the family dynamics, in the parenting relationship, in the relationship with between the parents. And then it shows up with them like it comes out sideways.
Yep.
And it usually looks
can
like
seem disconnected,
bad
like,
behavior.
They're just going crazy. Yeah.
No, they're just like, no, hello, there's a problem here.
Yes.
Yeah.
How are we not addressing this elephant in the room that is so clearly like stepping on my chest, but you guys seem to be able to just live on with life just fine. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some of the other phrases like, this is my house. I'm the one who makes the rules. Or I brought you into this world. I can take you out. I'm just trying to think of some of the ones that you've seen in like culture as well. I don't know. Is there any that come to mind for you as well?
I think it's the things that become less about whatever the choice was or the behavior was, and more about I'm starting to label or make assumptions about who you are or how you show up, or it's more about your essence and character.
Yep. Like,
where
so
it's just
you're lazy or selfish or even disrespectful, or you know what I mean? Yeah.
Loud and just annoying me, and really tying in that like responsibility for our emotions on them.
Yes.
And saying like, you make me sad when you blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Like one that I've been talking about a little bit more this week, just in general, because one of my experiences that like my mom in particular, she has even more kind of sensory sensitivities than I do. She's sensitive to light, sound, smell, taste, even touch on some level as well, because she also deals with chronic pain. And I was ADHD as a kid. Like I said, I'm loud and I usually talk fast. And so one of the things I walked away from childhood believing about myself is that I'm too loud or I'm too much. She never in a million years would have wanted me to believe that about myself. But her not having the language of, Laura, I need you to lower your voice. I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. It was usually, Laura, you're being too loud. Please bring it down. And she did just fine. Do you know what I mean? That like, but that's my stuff to unpack. And how does that like, I'm too loud or I'm too much then become a repeated lived pattern in my own life?
Yeah, when you really take that on to be true.
Yes.
Yeah. And it really, like, we can't control their perception.
No. Even if we think we're being clear as day. You know what I mean? That like they are still going to walk away and have their own stuff to unpack.
Right. Why? That's not fair.
I know. And I feel like, I don't know, I'm a therapist, so I always feel like therapist kids get it the worst too.
Is that why like pastors' kids have such a hard time too?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, so we've like covered all the topics, and like I could talk to you about a million things, but just to wrap up the co-regulation piece, I think it comes to a head, practically speaking, when we think about it with this idea of timeout and being able to kind of like have us have a break and them have a break, and there's all sorts of pragmatic semantics that can go into timeout, and you know the how long and the when, and if it's like the PITC type approach and all of those things. So how does knowing that they need co-regulation line up with this idea of timeout in your experience?
So my mom, she was raised in a generation where like, I'm not saying she was physically abused, beaten. I'm sure spanking was used. I don't think she got ever like a belt or anything like that. And I don't want to like dismiss her experience. And so, but she was very much raised in that generation of that was still normal. And so her generation of parents started getting into more like timeouts. And so that was an effective method for behavior modification in that time. And it was often used with me. And I know one of the things that like I kind of had briefly, because it really wasn't a huge deal, but briefly had targeted in my own therapy many years ago was I just had, when I was doing EMDR, I had this vision of myself being in timeout and just being alone. And, you know, I don't know what age, but definitely probably between the ages of 5 and 8, because I'm not really sure when she stopped using timeout, that I was able to just remember being kind of like scared, just being left with my feelings. And that's one of the reasons why I don't use timeout with my daughter, and I'm not judging parents who do. For me, when I look at like the complexities of timeout, I'm like, that just looks exhausting. Like it's more of a practical thing from my side of things, that instead of placing Mina in timeout, what I have found to be effective with her and for our relationship, so I'm speaking very subjectively, is that I often will invite her in for a hug or to sit in my lap. And in that time, I'm still getting regulated. She is dysregulated and trying to get back online. And so it's that idea of connection before redirection. If I can connect with her, and she will usually allow me to like kind of gently rock her side to side. And I might hum something. I don't usually say anything unless it's like, I know you're so upset. Get it all out. It's okay to feel this way, like that. But it's never like telling her shh, 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 or it's okay, because I just want her to be able to have that space and not like problem solve it. And so like I can see I understand how and why timeout can be very effective, especially if you have kids who are actually pretty agreeable to using it. Strong-willed kids? No. To me, it's like you just spent an hour trying to get them to spend 15 minutes in timeout, and now the entire house is dysregulated and disgruntled. Mm-hmm. That, like, just like I said, from a practical standpoint, I knew I was like, this is never going to work with her.
Yeah.
I'm just not even going to bother.
Because it just fueled more disconnection, more anger, more resentment, and lessons weren't learned because we can't control what they're thinking when they're away.
Right.
So...
Right. And you as a parent have to be confident enough in your abilities. You don't need to be regulated right that moment. If you need to step away and say, I need to take a timeout and go shut yourself somewhere, by all means, let the child know that, though, because if you just leave, you've now abandoned them in their mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all it needs is just a one sentence.
Yep.
I will be right back. I'm going to go to the bathroom. As soon as I come back, I'll be ready to help you.
Yes. Yes. And so it's not, don't think that like you have to just like white knuckle it and grab them in for a hug. That's just what's really worked for me and Mina. Does it work every time? No. There's many times where she's like, no. And so I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm just going to sit in here. Is that okay? Yes. You know what I mean? But staying close, and eventually she will come in.
Mm-hmm. And I think, especially with strong-willed kids, they have such a resistance to that vulnerability that sometimes they're really digging their heels in because it feels scary to connect with someone when they're feeling big feelings that are scary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I'm a grown adult and I still feel that way. And a therapist.
Yeah. I'd rather go to my room and cry than cry with a friend.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's an evolve. It's a like process rather than like there's just an achieving, checking that mark off of that. Yes, they learned it. It's very much just like a relationship based.
Yep.
Like reassurance, but not to the place of being so uncomfortable with it ourselves that we just want to fix it and move on.
Yeah, and you're still gonna feel that way. Mm-hmm. Like that's fine.
It's not fun to get screamed at.
Yeah, no. Congratulations, you're normal. Like, you just want to be like, oh my god, would you shut up?
Yes, you are not a bad parent for thinking that.
No. And if that is true, go ahead and put me in that camp. I will gladly accept that title.
Wait, we're already in failing motherhood. So
right.
So, to sum it up, what do you feel like moms need to hear to move forward from this episode without any added shame and with kind of like a takeaway or action step to move forward with?
So maintaining a place of curiosity. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling yourself getting activated or you're getting angry at anything I'm saying, or you're like, oh, so easy for her to say, good, lean into it. Because you know what? Yes, it is easy for me to say. You know what I mean? Like in this moment, you know what I mean? Like, and I can only reflect on my experience. But if you are experiencing activation around this, that is a sign that is something for you to maybe unpack in some way, shape, or form. Yep. And like the idea of over anything else, the relationship with your child is what is the priority. Now, I'm not talking about not having boundaries. Maybe that needs to be a different podcast.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you bend over backwards and do everything
Walk
for
on
them.
eggshells.
Yeah, or
You're
like
right.
lawn mow. I think lawnmower parent is like another one that's been added to the list.
Oh, no.
Where they just like mow down all the obstacles for the child.
Oh,
Not
yeah,
talking about that. I'm not
Right.
talking about that. It is maintaining a relationship with your child and with yourself, especially as women, because we are so disconnected from our own integrity and authentic selves, because we are taught very early on to lose ourselves in all of these labels in roles we can take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. The more that we grow, the more that we can pass on.
And because we can't give to our children, or anyone for that matter, anything we don't possess ourselves.
Yeah. If only we just like mastered all this before we had kids, but that's not the point.
No, it's not.
And if you have a strong-willed kid, and if they're your first kid, then this is like an accelerated journey.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I was like, I wonder what's going to be like, what do I get when I'm no longer on Earth? Like, you know what I mean? Like this idea of like, what's waiting for me? Is there like a trophy or
Yes. Some merit badges that we can throw out.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think the markers you're looking for is to use that discomfort, use that pain as information to further educate you and to help you know what's the next right step from here. So maybe it is seeking out a therapist if you haven't yet, to have more of those conversations, to be able to reflect more on your own childhood and to be able to become more aware of how you're showing up and the default that you're going to, and being able to have, more ability to override some of those things. Maybe it is, becoming more aware of your parenting strategies that you're using, because you find yourself just in that completely helpless, out of control state most of the time. And if you don't know what to do to get them to get their shoes on and get out the door, then yeah, you're going to have a really hard time staying regulated, because you're doing an impossible thing. So maybe it's, seeking out more parenting strategies. Maybe it's finding more, mental health support, or you just having more ability to regulate all the external stress that you're feeling right now and in other areas. Like, you really do have to know, what is my body, what is my brain telling me right now that I need to address?
Yeah. And I think a really big thing too, my goodness, people, celebrate your wins.
Yes.
And not like, I should have done this in the first place. No, just marinate in it. Don't judge it. Just be in it.
Yes. I love when a mom says, I was really proud of myself for how I handled this or stayed calm. Like, yes, you should be saying that every day.
Yes. And also like being able to, because if we can, or, maybe you start with your child, like when you're really proud of, and be very specific that like, that was really hard. You did such an amazing job of XYZ. And then also saying like, I'm really proud of me too. I didn't yell. Like,
yeah, high five.
Yeah.
And make that like a really conscious goal that you talk to your child about. I'm working on this. I'm trying to get better at, doing this instead of this behavior. And while I'm doing that, I'm hoping to teach you the way to handle your anger as well. And hopefully you're, lining yourself up with reminders and support for that, mantras, affirmations, therapy, whatever. And then you're able to then help them find books that really can verbalize, what they're going through, and help them find more coping skills. And it's an evolving process, but it's one that we all are on at one place or another.
Yeah. And we have more in common than we honestly want to give ourselves credit for, that we live in a world that's so disconnected and disjointed that, finding those common grounds, that can be very therapeutic and healing just in and of itself.
Yes. And I think we like to think that we're the only ones that have a temper. That's just not true.
Yeah, because in the moment it totally feels that way. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm just a terrible person. I'm never going to get better. But no, it's not your identity. It's your behavior.
Right.
So how can moms connect with you after this episode?
So my website would probably be the best way, which is www.laurapryortherapy.com. You can connect with me directly from there. I've also got links to all the different podcasts I've been on and articles I've written, a little bit more about my postpartum journey for a couple articles that I wrote early on. And that's usually the best way. I can't remember if I have like my social media hooked on there. I'm not super active, but on Instagram, it is at, and then all lowercase, Laura Pryor Therapy. And then it's basically the same name for Facebook. So
perfect. I will link all of that in the show notes for them to
awesome
find you. But thank you again for coming back on. And I feel like we hit all of the bases and could keep going for hours, but we will cut it off now so you can go to your next session and listeners can get back to their lives. But thank you all for spending this time together and having such a conscious, intentional effort at equipping yourself to know and understand and do better tomorrow. So
yes,
we're going to do that together. And thank you so much, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So what do you think of your free therapy? So good, right? So you could probably like summarize several books in just an hour to help you dive into what are the main highlights and be able to know what to do next. So as a bonus for listening through the whole episode, I wanted to tell you about a new resource that I have created to do all of these things that we just talked about, to become more aware of the stories you're telling yourself and become a lot more conscious of your triggers and how you are showing up and what you're thinking in those hard moments. And it's called the Triggers Workbook. And this is a resource for you to be able to have tools and practical exercises that allow you to take a step-by-step approach to understanding yourself better and deeper and knowing what to think instead, what to do instead, and having really, really practical tools to trick your brain into calming down and just become a whole lot more confident in your ability to weather your child's storm and to be their safe place. So I would love for you to get that resource, and I will link all of the information for it in the show notes. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. I believe in you, and I'm cheering you on.